Hi, this is the second half of the class for the first week of the online course Developing Templates for LawHelp Interactive. We are going to be focusing on what is item Roman numeral 5 in the syllabus, creating hotdocs variables and prompts. Having seen how hotdocs works on the desktop and online from the point of view of a user of a finished template, we want to see how such templates are constructed. Before I do that, I'm just going to momentarily show you the employment agreement we were just in. If we look at this template behind the scenes, as many of you know who are doing the hotdocs tutorials, this is what a hotdocs template looks like. It's in this case, a Word document with special codes, these chevrons and colored variable names that represent the pieces, the variables that will be presented to a user for answer and then merged into your document as such, as typed, or in some situations as formatted specifically for a given context. And this is the nature of any hotdocs template that has a word processing feature or nature. It's got the controls to include paragraphs or not, if-then statements. We'll be seeing how to do these. It shows various ways in which you can merge in answers and deal with the possibility of the answer not being given by the user. Let me just stop there and let's go do one of these. So I'm going to save and close this guy and focus on how we can create variables, how you can in your own learning experience. There is again a set of homework associated with this course, with each class, and the things I'm about to show you are actually described here for you to do on your own after you watch this. There's not as much detail here in this document as you may see in my presentation, so you may find this recording a useful reference point. First step is to create a new library. So we've been looking at the demonstration template library that hotdocs provides as part of installing hotdocs developer. It's generally a good idea to create a fresh library for any new project. Let me call this LHI developer training. That's going to be the name of the file of this library. If I click in the title field, it adopts that file name as the title, which is fine. Description is optional. And now I have a brand spanking new library in my hotdocs environment for us to create templates inside of and work with without confusing them with other material from other libraries. So we have a library in existence, it's empty. We want to create a new template that's going to be the focus of our authoring work. So I clicked on the new template button. I'm now being prompted for various parameters of this template. It defaults to a Word docx template, which is fine for the present purposes. You could just as easily make it RTF. For some purposes that may be easier. Let's choose that for now. We need to give it a name and a location. So I'm just going to put it in my my default hotdocs templates folder. You may prefer to create a subfolder for this that may make life a little easier. But let me just call this, let's see, this is going to be a Montana dissolution template. And or let's call it Montana divorce petition, which is what I suggest in the homework to be consistent. And because I think I've already done a couple of these myself in past trainings, I'm just going to put a 2018 on it, but you don't need to do that. Once again, the title defaults to the file name. That's fine. Description is optional. Now, what's this thing going to consist of? What are the contents? In the case of this training, we're going to grab a sample Montana divorce petition that's made available to you and that you've been asked to download to your My Documents folder. So let me go and use that in my Documents, and somewhere in here I've got a sample Montana divorce petition. That's going to be the starting point. That's going to be the content I use to begin with for this template. So I've specified the type, the file name, the title, and the initial contents. Now hotdocs goes forth and creates a template. And as you may recall, in the case of a template with hotdocs, there's always at least two files. There is the so-called template file, which is this RTF we're looking at, and there's an associated component file which we'll be looking at in a little more detail. So far this is exactly what I started with. It's a sample document that's got some yellow highlighted material that we're imagining a user gave to us to explain how this thing works. It tells us that there are parts that should only be included if there's children, for instance. It's got imaginary data in it that we'll need to replace it with variables so that they can be customized for any given future case. While you're here, and I'm using Word, a relatively old version of Word, you may have a much more modern, but the experience is conceptually very similar. There's a hotdocs menu item and an associated ribbon. And this is one way you know you're in a hotdocs template, is because you've got this ribbon in its full glory, which tells you all the pieces, all the bits of functionality you can invoke as part of creating a hotdocs template. So let's get to work. We're going to start automating this template and put in some variables. The most basic thing is to create a text variable. Now when it comes to a name like this, you may often want to make this into two variables, one for the first name and one for the last name. That gives you much more power when it comes to being able to address somebody just by part of their name. In the case of a petitioner, that's probably a good idea. So let's just do a first name for Paula. Now what I'm doing is highlighting the word Paula, pressing the variable field button. Hotdocs is going to offer to create a variable for me. It defaults to text, which is the appropriate type. We'll be dealing with these other types momentarily. And we need to give this variable a name. And here again, hesitate for a moment to be aware that you can name variables in almost any kind of way. We highly recommend you do it consistently. There's a set of conventions we encourage folks to use when working with LawHelp Interactive that basically looks like this: petitioner name first TE. So you put the most significant word first. You try to avoid unnecessary pronouns, make these names reasonably short, and add a two-letter abbreviation at the end to indicate what type of variable it is. That makes it a little easier when you're inspecting a template to know right on the surface what kind you're dealing with. So petitioner name first TE. Now the word Paula appears in many different places across this template. I can just go ahead and replace this one instance with the variable, or I can replace multiple. And for present purposes, I'm going to replace all. So every place in this template that I started with where the word Paula appeared now has been replaced by petitioner name first TE with chevrons on either side, signifying to hotdocs that this now is a variable that a user can answer, and whatever answer they give will appear in the assembled document at the location that variable used to be. We'll do the same with the last name. So I'm going to go through the same process. This will be petitioner name last TE. I think I just have one space. Oops. Excuse me. And replace that multiple as well. Place all. Okay. So we have the name. Let's do the address. And address presents a similar issue in terms of granularity. Do you want to have the whole address in one field, or do you want to break it into pieces? Ordinarily, it depends entirely upon what you intend to do with the address pieces. For present purposes, let's break it into pieces. So this is going to be petitioner address street. TE. And we'll also replace that everywhere just to make life a little easier. Helena is going to be the city. just going to use the word city here and replace multiple. When it comes to the state, we'll leave that alone for the moment because that's going to be a different kind. But we can do zip code. Now zip code is a number. You would think perhaps that should be a number variable, but au contraire, it really is a text variable because it might have punctuation in it. Petitioner zip code TE. So you wouldn't have a true number for this because it's not something you compute with, calculate with, and again, it may have a dash inside of it, and if it was a number variable, HotDocs wouldn't let you add a dash as a user. And the same thing applies to phone number, by the way. We'll do that while we're here. Even though it has numerals in it, it is a text type of variable. Okay, so far we've got examples of text, and that's all. The only kind of variables we've entered so far. Let's jump around and do a different kind. So here we have date of birth. This is obviously a date variable. So let's create one of these to illustrate that. So here we're not going to be choosing the default type. We're going to click on date, and we'll call this petitioner birth date. DA. There's a default format, which is fine for present purposes. You can control that and choose a whole variety of different formats for dates. But let's just replace this once because I don't think the date of the petitioner's birth shows up anywhere else, and we wouldn't want it to. One other example is a number variable. So we have up here in the judicial district, and I believe we should be careful here. If you look at your underlying Word document, you may notice that it's set to all caps. This is a trap for the unwary. HotDocs cares about case when it comes to variable names, and if you leave all caps on, Word is going to capitalize the name of the variable, and then HotDocs is going to freak out because it doesn't know such a variable by that all-capped name. So we recommend you turn off all caps here. In this case, the underlying letters are capital, so it doesn't make a difference. But that's a potential problem that you're avoiding by doing what I just did. Now here, we're going to take the number of the judicial district and make that a variable, just to illustrate. I'm going back to my HotDocs menu, my HotDocs ribbon, to illustrate the idea of a number variable. So choose number, and we'll call this judicial district number, NU. Notice something interesting here. HotDocs has defaulted the format to a capitalized ninth. It noticed that the underlying word we highlighted to replace was a capitalized ordinal. So it's volunteering to do the same thing with any number we enter, which is kind of nice. And that's how you can get a number answer presented and formatted as a capitalized ordinal in your document. So we'll replace that once. And you'll notice in the actual reference to the variable, HotDocs has got the word ninth, the format itself, there right on the surface of your template, so you know what's going on. All right, we're going to deal with the gender of the petitioner, and there's a variety of ways to do that. Let's go down to, let's see, let's do the state first. That's probably simpler. So we've got the state. This is one place we have it. Presently, it's just an abbreviated form. If we want to create a variable for this, this is going to give us our first example of a multiple choice. because a state, unlike a city, which you may have too many to provide a list of, states, there's a known universe of state options. So if we choose a multiple choice, we can then specify the listing and let the user pick rather than having to type. That'll ensure some consistency. We can then have either the full state name or the abbreviated state name come in. So this one we're going to call petitioner state MC, and let's just replace that once for now. We can come down later and use that wherever we want to use it. To deal with the gender, if you scroll down to the very end of your document, let's take the word she. This obviously is a word that depends upon the gender of the petitioner, and we're not going to get into non-binary gender issues for present purposes. We're just showing some mechanics. But let's imagine we're only offering a he or she option to make things a little simpler. Now this is going to be a multiple choice variable, which is a little counterintuitive. We'll call this petitioner gender MC, multiple choice. Now we could just put this here, and it's going to, it's going to need to know what choices should the user be offered when they're specifying the gender. So right now we're just naming the variable and putting it in your template. You can also click on this little editing pencil here just to define the properties of this variable, such as its prompt. In this case, you probably want to offer options such as male, female, so you can type those in. And then over here on the right, there's something called default merge text. This would be he, she, him, her, he, she, etc. If you knew every time you were using the person's gender you had one of these, you could make it by default the merge text. We're not going to specify any merge text in general for this multiple choice variable, but in this particular context, obviously it needs to be he or she. So we're unchecking use defaults. We're going to check he, she here and replace once. And now you see that instance of the gender answer is merged in your document as a he or she. You'll notice there's another reference to she right here, and I'll just show you how I would do this myself. I would just copy that thing as such and paste it. So now we have the two she's confirmed. But down here we have the word her. Now we can go to the variable field, go to the multiple choice list, pick the gender. Once again, we're not going to use the default, there is none, but we're going to use, let's see, her, his, her. Replace once. So a lot of work, but it handles this paragraph very nicely. So now we have the petitioner's first and last name, the gender in the form of he or she twice, and then his or her once. That's a way to deal with the multiple choice for gender. Let's go back to the state variable, because we want to populate that with some choices. And if you want to revisit a variable like this, you can just right click on it and either edit the field, which is how it behaves in this particular location, or edit the underlying component, which we want to do here, because we want to give this component, this multiple choice component, a universe of options that the user can pick. Now, if you happen to be competent at typing 50 states, you can do that manually. If you prefer to do this a little bit more efficiently, you can go to our homework, and we have a handy list of states right here that you can copy. There's a couple different ways to do this. I'm just going to show you one. So I'm highlighting and doing a Control C. Now back here in Hot Docs, I can go right click, paste multiple, and voila, I've got my 50, I hope 51, including District of Columbia, options. for state. While I'm at it, I'm going to put the word state here as a prompt. If you don't have a prompt in HotDocs, it uses the variable name, and sometimes that's okay, but our practice of putting these abbreviations in variable names makes them generally inappropriate for prompts. So this is a multiple choice. There's lots of other behavior you can deal with here. We'll see some of this as we go through the course. But for now, the main thing is we've got a set of options. We will have the ability, should we desire, to use an abbreviated form of the state in certain contexts. But I'm just going to click OK for now. It's a one only. There's one person's address only has one state at a time, but you could have multiple choice, all that apply options. You can offer others in case there are other states that have to be accommodated. And there's different ways in which you can approach how this is presented to a user. But enough of that. Okay, so where are we? Here we are back in Word. We've got one or two other steps to do before we wrap up this first class. One of them is to show the example of a computation variable. So where would we have a computation? One example here is age. We have a birth date. Should we need to ask the user for the age as well, or can we just calculate that from their birth date? And the answer, of course, is yes. So if I want to highlight the age here, now I'm creating a computation variable. We'll call this petitioner age CO for computation. And once again, we want to edit this while we're here to actually specify how HotDocs should figure out the age. There's a whole world of functionality in the scripting of computations, very powerful set of tools. The short answer here is there is a built-in expression module for age that I can just go grab. And what it's going to do is just compute the age of somebody given a certain birth date. So how do I replace this word date, which is in red, signifying it's a placeholder, with an actual variable? Down here are the variables we've created so far. This is the universe of variables that we have called into existence. I can click on birth date and just highlight it, drag it, and drop it right there. And now this computation will deliver the age of any person given a specified birth date. There's a button at the bottom called Testing Components, which we highly recommend. You can test things component by component. In this case, if I want to say this person was born on 3/3/1991, if I click the Result tab, it'll tell me he or she is 27 years old. So we've confirmed that this birth date calculator, the age calculator, works. And a little test assembly, I'm not going to bother saving that. So that guy is good. Having described its script, I can replace once, and that now is put into the template and will deliver the appropriate age based upon any birth date. One more thing we may want to do is to show how to add a resource. So let's say, just a simple example, if I go and edit this component, the petitioner first name, if I want to help the user understand who the petitioner is, I can add a light bulb icon to that. And let's just say our help here is petitioner is the one filing the divorce petition. That's going to be available in context of this variable. Now, you can, as we've said, you can test any individual component like we did with the age. You can also test the entire template. So here in the HotDocs toolbar ribbon, there is a test assemble button that you'll get comfortable with. And I can say, how does this thing look so far? You'll notice here's our petitioner name first. It's got that handy resource that we created so we can help the person. It's got our other variables. Some of them are just using the default prompt, which is the name of the variable. Some are using the prompt we've given it. They're all strung together, and we're about to get into how to construct a better interview. But this thing is reasonably functional. If I have information in these fields, HotDocs now will start assembling, and it'll give me an assembled document, and it'll put in the appropriate information in the appropriate locations. So that in a nutshell is what we're doing here in lesson 1, part 2. One other concept that I can mention, prompts like this one for state, or let's say petitioner street address. Suppose you want to actually reference the name of the petitioner when you ask the user for their street address. So if I right-click on that field in my test assembly, my prompt here might be something like, what is, and I'm going to put in a reference to the petitioner's first name, so I can, I'm just doing this, I'm holding down the shift key and pressing the two angle brackets to the left to get a chevron. That's one way to do that. This is just to show conceptually, and doing the same on the right hand side. Now my prompt actually has the value of another variable inside the prompt. So if I click OK, notice I've said, so if I said John, the prompt's going to be, what is John's street address? There are some nuances to how you do this. Obviously, if you don't have an answer, it's going to look a little weird. And if the person's name ends in an S, you don't have an apostrophe S, etc. But I wanted to show that concept as a way to wrap up this segment. With that, we'll stop. We'll come back in lesson number 2, in class number 2, and show you how you can begin to break these kinds of interviews into segments, and how you can start conditionalizing parts of your document so that they will only appear based upon certain answers being in certain ways. Thanks.